that. The final speaker for the Humanities Minisymposium is Mr. Tony DelaRosa. Mr. DelaRosa is a proud Filipinx-American aspiring anti-oppression educator, motivational speaker, poet, and consultant. He holds a BA in Japanese language and creative writing from the University of Cincinnati and a master's from Harvard. His writing has been featured in CNN, The Hetchinger Report, NPR, Hyphen Magazine, and more. He founded a national youth spoken word poetry network called PostPoetry, encompassing Indy, Boston, and Miami. It provides a curriculum for kids to find their own voice through the intersection of arts, literacy, and liberatory conscious pedagogy. He loves anime, RPGs, reading about critical ethnic and race theory, and cooking with sriracha. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Mr. DelaRosa.
Thanks for having me. Testing. Can you hear me?
Indeed,
Awesome.
we can, and you should be able to share your screen at this time.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, y'all. That was a great introduction. I'm going to share my presentation really quick. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. All right. Let's jump right in. So excited to be here. I'm an educator by trade and a coach. So a lot of this is with humanities and a lot of this is qualitative research. A lot of this is action-based research. So a lot of the research specifically for poetry and spoken word, a lot of it is done by doing. So I'm excited to be a part of it, be on the, I guess people would say, at the ahead of the game in terms of like doing the work, because I've actually enacted it and created my own program. A lot of this presentation in and of itself will just go over what the impacts of poetry has, and like how can praxis be woven into poetry. And we're gonna focus on a small pilot that I did in Boston. And some implications from there. But yes, it should be relaxing. It shouldn't require too much of your brain capacity, but more so of your emotional intelligence to kind of grapple with it and give it a chance. I would love for more people to jump into this field as educators. And before I start, I want to share this poem itself because it is Filipino American History Month. So I gotta rep my people. So I'm just gonna share a little piece of it. If you ask me if I'm fluent in Filipino, I will tell you my Filipino is not my anchor, although leagues beneath me. Holding its breath, my Filipino breathes in half beats, a language of too many tongues and too many words. My Tagalog is my mother's. My Kapampangan is my father's. Both tongues be captains and captives at the same shipwreck. So right there in and of itself is what I'm talking about. A lot of this is action-based research. From there, you should kind of feel your body a little bit and kind of perk up, right? You should kind of feel your body, feel the vagus nerve, right? Activate your body. When the vagus nerve activates, softens up a little bit and perks up at the same time. It's a fun tension. And you should be able to now kind of wake up. It gives you a sense of dopamine, right? So a lot of this work I just needed to do to engage my students, right? So these are my three, I call them my daughters. We have Kelly, Nylasia, and Glody, and they're public speakers now. So my objectives are understand what is praxis. It's just fancy words, y'all, to mean theory, action, and reflection, and understanding the potential impacts of praxis through poetry education. So I just want to start us off, and this will actually end a little early too. But with terminology, praxis comes from Paulo Freire, which is a Brazilian educator. I would say the father of praxis in general. Praxis has been used since this time, but right now, since Brazilian educator Paulo Freire enacted praxis, a lot of educators in culturally relevant pedagogy, ethnic studies have used this idea of this framework of using theory, creating a theory, enacting it, right? And then reflecting on it in that same process throughout. So I use this framework throughout my program as I was building it in my first year of teaching. The role of Praxis in poetry education. So I was just thinking right now, I think like an entrepreneur because this is how I enacted my own research, right? I was starting in my first year of teaching. I just joined, maybe you might know the program, Teach for America. I just got inducted to the program. And I moved from Cincinnati at that time when I was doing spoken word in cafes. You might know that person in your classroom, in your undergrad, in your class, that you're like, yo, that's that person. They go to cafes, they take poetry. They're probably a hipster, right? That was me doing that. And I was passionate about educating as well, so I joined the program. And when I first joined the program, we know that it's a leadership organization that places us in underserved communities, right? So I was placed in Indianapolis around 38th degree parallel, which is one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in actually the nation, right? I did not know that. I did not know that was the case. And of course, the demographic of the region was, or the issue was a lack of funding in schools. Obviously, there was drug and violence happening around the area, food deserts, so on and so forth, right? As I was teaching that goes into the schools, and I taught elementary at the time. And when I was there, what did I notice, right? I came in with my spoken word, I came in with my hip hop, but I was exhausted. Um, why were my students not engaged, right? I saw a lot of issues with engagement, a lot of issues with Lexile scores and reading levels, right? I saw a lot of issues with student confidence and youth voice. And right now, the problem that I focused on specifically out of all those that I told myself at that time 8 years ago was I'm going to work on something that I know that I'm good at is building student confidence and youth voice, right? How can I do that as a teacher? And how can I go above and beyond the expectation? So as an entrepreneur, or if you're into design work, you create your theory of change, you go through this in process of creating the problem, diagnosing the problem, creating a solution, and creating your theory of change of that issue, right? So for me, the theory of change was if I provide an after-school program for students, right, on spoken word pedagogy, which is something that I can offer, then students will cultivate their own voice and thus a sense of confidence to voice their concerns. That's it. I just wanted to measure that. And I, as a person who didn't really do a thesis in undergrad, didn't do a lot of research, I was like, can we actually measure confidence? And luckily I was doing my master's at the time, so that yes, you can honestly measure anything. If you talk to our previous presenter Priya, she's she's a candidate for a PhD program, and you could really take any abstract thing and whittle it down to something tangible, right? That's what people do for a living. So that's what I did with confidence. I was like, how can I measure this? So what I did was I was like, you know what? I'm going to start this program. I'm going to build it and then test it, right? We started in Indianapolis, and it was just an after-school program, right, to engage students, right, to build a youth voice. I'm going to play this so you can see kind of like what it was about, and you can hear from some of my students who were impacted by the program in Indiana. Just testing. Annabella, can you hear my video?
Yes, we can indeed.
Perfect. All right. Playing 3, 2, 1, and go.
I am from light that restores my happiness.
I'm from a mom who raised me to be a lady who fights for what I believe in.
Past progressive sentences. Good. In 2013, we started a spoken word or youth organization called Indie Pulse.
I'm from a generation where we rather have our happiness trapped by a screen held in our hand.
So how you guys feeling? Yeah! Most of it's fun. I mean, some of it gets really deep as well because they're speaking their realities and their truths.
I am from myself that buries the skeletons.
Me, I prefer my happiness up close. If you ask me where I'm from, I'll simply state the hood. But don't lose interest in me yet.
I'm not judgmental. I'm the one who watches your moves.
They can feel empowered through their own voice. They can be self-advocates. That's part of what Indie Pulse brings to the classroom.
I'll be the one to show low class that there's no excuse for why you can't be who you want to be.
I'm not the you want me to be. I am me.
Embrace the struggle. Embrace it because it defines our dreams. Embrace it because it defines me and you.
So those are my two students. I still communicate with Dylan right now, and they are amazing. They're public speakers now, right? So all throughout this presentation, kind of hear some of the impacts of it. Um, Self-confidence links to what they can do later on in life. And part of what I wanted for them was, can you use a skill that you already have that I can just help cultivate? One being your voice, right? So one of my ultimate goals is for every student that goes through the program, they're able to get hired and use that and help themselves get out of poverty, in this case, using their own voice, right? So I'm slowly tracking that still. It's hard because these students were my first students in 2013 and 2012. So where are they, right? They've already went through college. I mean, they're in undergrad, right? So they're sitting in this like same seats as you all, right? Which is crazy. So that's kind of the skinny of the program. You don't want to see that again. Let me see if I can get out of here. Cool. So I bring this program to Boston. I had to move, y'all. I moved for love. It's not obvious, but I moved for love. And you know what? The first thing that came to my brain was I need to do the same program because there's so much power in storytelling and how much you can transcend to kids. And I knew that I did it well in Indianapolis, right? So I was like, you know what? In Boston, I'm gonna teach, I'm gonna try to scale this project and pilot it in Boston. So this specific context, and you'll see a couple of the data set that I had, data set as in, it's a qualitative self-assessment from kids, pre and post. You'll see how it is focused on an intensive after school program, after school, during the summer, right? If you think about camps, you probably think of it on the right, and people are like coming together, doing kumbaya, but I really scaled up camp on my own from scratch, and it's hella work. And the program topic was spoken word, but specifically, that was the mode. The specific topic was identity and intersectionality. And then the sample size was 30 students. It was me and another teacher, Dana Ruff, who still is the director of the program now. I'm now a speaker. I piloted around, but he actually controls the program now in Boston. My clients or our audience or the participants of the program, 80% were Black, women, young women, ages 12 to 15. And the duration of this was 4 weeks, 1 to 2 hours per day. And the method, again, was a pre-post qualitative survey. The control here was, can I position what an intensive poetry public speaking program would be and what impacts are in relation to how it would be in the school year and what are the impacts, right? And what can we do with that? So I'm gonna show this small data set here. It's not the full survey, but it's a part of it, right? So I gave this to our students. The names are obviously blocked off for confidentiality and consent reasons, but a few questions that I asked the kids were, how would you measure your own spoken word abilities, right? That's how I kind of assess them and figure out how I can differentiate my own instruction in the curriculum. And then post would be obviously like the same question. And then the second question here was, how confident do you feel speaking in public, right? And that's where we kind of helped measure the confidence, right? 1, not confident, 2, semi-confident, 3, confident, very confident, right? And most people coming into the program itself came in at around a 2, a 1, 2, mostly at 1s, right? Kids in middle school and in like the early stages of high school, I've worked at around probably 5 different schools now, seen elementary, middle school, and high, and done this same pre and post test. They all come around this. Kids don't have an outlet to practice their public speaking, right? So this is where I learned, right? After this program of 4 weeks, this could happen. So what did we do in those 4 weeks, right? You're probably wondering what we did. It was intensive, right? We start off with a pulse circle, essentially, which is a restorative justice practice. And we go through literally roses and buds talking about ourselves, talking about identity, right? It has kids talking about things that they don't have the option in school to talk about. I don't know, think to yourself, when the last time you got to talk about your positionality, your power, your privilege, right? Your relation to privilege, right? In school. Who gets to do that, right? So we offer that space after school. Then from there, we wrote about it, right? So if you think about the framework, the theory was if they write about it, if they think about their own identity, they can improve their own self-confidence through mastering their narrative, right? So what they did was write. They wrote poems based on topics. So around this time, I have my own curriculum, which is focused on Filipino American History Month and Disability Awareness Month, because at schools, we go along with the months and we study this, right? And we write about it, we read the poem. If you know anyone in the Filipinx community, Ruby Ibarra is someone who is a champion in our space. So we studied a lot of Ruby Ibarra, and they got to learn, right, about someone else. As a diversity, equity, inclusion facilitator and anti-racist coach and consultant, thinking about that now, I was like, okay, now we're getting from my own framework of self in relation to others, and not quite self in relation to systems. That's pretty rigorous to get at a middle school and under like the beginning of high school stage. But we definitely were able to hit from self and understanding that, building that knowledge, building that confidence of self, and then building that confidence in relation to others, right? How can we bridge build, essentially? So those are some impacts of what spoken word could do, and what I focused on during October. And then obviously there's other impacts, right? So that pilot program was just one out of many, right? There's obviously there's a lot more impacts of what storytelling effects can do. We study this, right, from neurocoupling. This is taken from Mindshift, which is a program. It's a program connected to NPR in the Bay Area, and they focus on education, right? And they focus on the mind. So what I took from that was, yes, the work that we do with spoken word pedagogy activates those neurocouplings, right? Where when we share stories, right, you perk up, right? You like, there's a synapses in the body, right? Dopamine, you can see here, where dopamine is released, you can get emotionally charged and your emotional intelligence is activated. And then that mirroring happens, right? Because spoken word is a dialectic, meaning that it is a conversation, right? It is real time. So once you're in a spoken word environment, how we set it up is you do your piece, but you also expect the audience to react. So normally I would set the tone for you all and I would see you all. I can't see who's watching, who's reacting, who's emoting in this moment. But normally if you're in front of me and we're doing a spoken word group circle, I would say my piece and I would encourage saying, if you like something that's fire, make some snaps, right? Show me so I can see that how it lives in your body, how you're reacting and how it's landing on you and your own lived experience, right? And of course, you might get some things where people don't react, right? That's when you know a poem or a story falls dead. So there's a lot more research that I feel like has not, what I'm trying to say is this is fresh and ready to be like tackled on a PhD level. I'm not that person. I like to practice this thing and bring it to communities, but there's a big opportunity for students to study this work, come to schools, learn about the impacts. You know, I would, as a nonprofit CEO and founder, I would want to invite folks to come in, right? A think tank, a policy leader, right? Someone who can come in and study more of the work around empathy, right? I'm learning that right now, based on the work that we've been doing, that spoken word builds empathy. It opens that door, right? Going back to the vagus nerve in your body, it makes someone relax. And when someone's relaxed, people can actually set the container for having difficult conversations around race, right? And if we talk about the now and why that's necessary, we talk about the uprising, right? Spoken word pedagogy is necessary today in schools today, especially as we approach the election. How are kids feeling in, especially our low income and underserved communities? How are they feeling in this pandemic, right? Schools are not a good place to be right now, right? So they need something to activate them. And I implore folks to try it out, get involved, write a poem for yourself, see what that makes you feel, present that to someone, right? How does that make you them feel, right? Do you feel like if you talk about your own identity and your story, it lessens, it softens the body, right? That's a real thing that you can practice outside of this space, right? And see where else you could take poetry. Again, is really short presentation of what it could do. But poetry as well. After this presentation, I'll share with you a couple other things that we did with PostPoetry in Miami, right? Since now it's shifted to Miami. But I wanted to share some resources beforehand. Some people who are actually practitioners in the field. Brave New Voices is a huge program, if you've heard of them. They are leading the research in it now. Mass Leap in Massachusetts is. Call and Responsibility is an article published in Harvard Press, right, which talks about culturally responsive pedagogy in general and how that can be woven in and how it intersects spoken word pedagogy. Some things that I use in my own practice is add your beat to the, and then I'll put my hand out, pulse, right, which activates that dialectic, right, with the community. The science and benefits of spoken word in the community. So I could have taken this entire presentation and talked to you about community. I think I kind of want to do it. I had two other plans. What other things I wanted to talk about with you in terms of this, but I think I want to talk about another pilot that I did in Boston and then move to Miami. And then again, weaving multiple dialects in the classroom. So once you use spoken word, hip hop pedagogy, it falls under the category of hip hop pedagogy. Once you use spoken word pedagogy, you'll start to see that kids can start seeing themselves in the work, right? Another issue that we see in schools all around districts. I've lived as a student in San Diego. I've lived in Ohio, where I grew up. I taught in Indianapolis, I taught in Boston, and I've taught in Miami, right? It has been the same. We don't see Black Indigenous people of color reflected in the curriculum. So spoken word can actually also be helpful to filling that gap of ethnic studies, right? And recreating a canon per se, right? What is the canon right now? Shakespeare, white dead folks, right? Let me just be real and direct with you, right? So kids don't see themselves reflected in the work. So it's harder to really build bridges and understand and get activated and do the work, right? I'm going to bring us back to this. I'm going to bring us back to this. So I ended a little early, but I'm going to share one more example of where poetry education helped out, right? I didn't really outline this in the presentation in the deck, because I thought I would actually go a little longer. But one other pilot that I did was in relation to school to prison pipeline. If I could share this with one of the organizers after this to share out to the audience members later on, I will totally do so. But one thing, I worked at a school called Match Charter School. The issue at a lot of charters or no nonsense charter schools is that the discipline system, right? The way it's practiced essentially mirrors and creates a pathway, right? If people don't understand the school to prison or pre-K to prison pipeline, or pre-K to prison pipeline, it's basically where the discipline policies, the minor infractures, right, in the policy systems make Black and brown students, right, go to suspension, lead to higher suspension rates, detention rates, both in school, out school suspension, leading to expulsion, right? And there's so much research around what that does to someone's psyche, and this goes into psychology, right? And you can see why a lot of the students that we serve in underserved communities, anywhere we go, right? And I told you I lived in many different cities. I've seen the same reaction under motivation, right? Not having confidence, not feeling like they have a voice to speak. So when we hosted an actual training with the school, we had two students, back to Glody. I'll highlight Glody and Nylasia. They led their own training at the school around what policies and systems were helpful for them, right? Using their own voice after practicing, right? They were second years in the program. And from there, they talked to teachers about what type of infractions and how we should flip that and refocus ourselves on a strength-based approach in how we approach building relationships with kids, right? That training alone helped solve an issue that we were having at school. The issue we were having at school was with our new staff was a good, like, from 50 to 100 between the start of August of 2015 and 2015 to December. We started seeing 50, 60, 70, 80, up to 100 kids in detention daily, right? That's when you know the system is broken, right? And that's where we came in. The principal asked us, well, your kids are coming to you, your program keeps growing. So can you lead a training? For me, I wanted to, put my money where my mouth is, have our two students, Nylasia and Glody, lead it, and essentially tell teachers and teach them, right, what they need, right, which is another thing that is necessary in education right now. From there, suspension rates, literally from January to the end of the year, dropped in half, right? Just by listening from the constituent, listening to the client, right, which was our students, right? So there's a lot of impacts that I could have talked about, and that's just another example of what could happen. So some implications. If we brought poetry to schools, right? If we brought that as an in-school program, especially in our underserved communities, I believe, one, they would feel heard and seen, their voice would be cultivated, and they would actually have a stake in the policies and systems. They could have a stake if they were invited in the policies and systems that impact them. And I really do believe that if we get more educators who believe in that, a lot of you all are thinking of what career you want to choose. I do believe that if you go into teaching, this is an outlet for kids to close part of the opportunity gap, right? Of not seeing someone themselves in the curriculum, and then also challenging the student to the school to prison pipeline as well. So a lot of things to talk about with poetry. There's still a lot of untapped things as well with poetry right now, but I'll leave it there because I know that we'll go into our panel and people will probably be like, what else can we do? So thank you again for inviting me, Annabella, and showing that short and telling that story essentially, and sharing that piece of my pilot. I'm excited to share a little bit more through the panel.
Thank you very much, Tony.